Hey class, this is lesson 8.3 on graphing quadratic functions. So in this lesson we are going to learn how we can graph quadratic functions once we've found a couple things that we learned how to find in 8.2. So this right here is going to be our step-by-step process. First we're going to find the axis of symmetry. Remember that shows us kind of where our parabola splits in half. Then we'll find the vertex. Then we'll use that to find the y-intercept. Now if you recall from a few chapters ago, the y-intercept is when x equals 0. So remember, it's where it crosses the y-axis. So that would be something good to jot down. So it crosses y-axis. So far we've just been talking about the x-intercepts, or the zeros. So that, remember, that was where it crossed the x-axis, but now we're going to see where it would cross the y. And then after that, to get another couple points that we can graph from, we're going to just reflect the y-intercept over the axis of symmetry. So let's look at this first example here. We're going to start by finding the axis of symmetry. So remember that our formula for that is x equals the opposite of b over 2 times a. So in this first example here, our a value is 3, and our b value is -6. Okay, so if we plug that in, we'll have x equals the opposite of b, so we'd have negative b, so that would be a +6, then those will cancel out, over 2 times 3. Well, 2 times 3 is 6, so 6 over 6, same as 1. So our axis of symmetry is 1. Now we're going to use that to go and find the vertex. So remember, the vertex, we plug in our x value that we got from our axis of symmetry, and we solve that for y. So we'll have y equals 3 times 1 squared minus 6 times 1 plus 1. So we should have 3 minus 6 plus 1, and we should get -2, I believe. So y equals -2. So that means our vertex is the point 1, -2. Okay, so now we can go ahead and graph so far what we have. So let's go ahead and graph the vertex at 1, -2. Our axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. So I'm just going to draw a dotted line here to show that that's where our parabola is going to split in half. And if you recall from lesson 1, we should know that our parabola is going to open up because our a value is positive. Okay, so there's what we have so far. Now we're ready to find the the y-intercept. So remember that that is the point where x equals 0. So what I'm going to do for this step now is I am going to plug in 0 for my x value. So I'm just going to rewrite that same equation, and I should find that y equals 1. Now kind of the shortcut way to get there, all these x's end up canceling out, and so we're just left with whatever our constant or our c value is. So our c value is going to equal whatever our intercept or our y-intercept is. Okay, so that means when I go to graph this, it's going to cross the y-axis at 1, so that would be right here. So there's one more point that I can put down. And now for my step 4, I'm going to reflect this y-intercept across the axis of symmetry. So I can see that that's 1 unit away from my axis of symmetry. So my other point I could put down then would be 1 unit to the right. Okay, so remember, it's just cutting it in half. So then I can go ahead and connect my 3 points. Once I've got 3 points, I can make my graph. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, so first of all, we're going to do step 1, find our axis of symmetry. So I'm going to use x equals -b over 2a. Okay, and my a value is 1, my b value is -6, c value is 9. Okay, so now I'm going to just plug that in. So I'm going to have x equals -6 again, right? So those will cancel out and give me a +6. And then 2 times 1 on the bottom, so I'll have 6 over 2, which is the same as 3. So there's my axis of symmetry on the line x equals 3. So I'm going to go ahead and drop down here and graph that right away. So x equals 3 would be right here. This line right here will be what my parabola is reflected over. Okay, now that I know my axis of symmetry, I'm going to go back and find my vertex. So remember, my vertex has this 3 as an x-coordinate. And then to find the y-coordinate, I'm going to plug that back in to my original equation up here. So I'm going to have 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 9. So I'll have y equals 9 minus 18 plus 9. And that should give me a 0, looks like. So that means my vertex is at the point 3, 0. So I'm going to go ahead and graph that point. So 3, 0 is right here. So there is my vertex. And then after I've gotten my vertex, then I can go and, if I look back on my little chart here, this will be really handy for you to keep by your side. So we found our axis of symmetry, find the vertex, and now we're going to find our y-intercept. So remember, y-intercept is when x is 0. So I'm going to go back to my original equation, and I'm going to sub in 0 for x. So I'm going to have y equals 0 squared minus 6 times 0 plus 9. Remember, the shortcut is whatever our constant is. So you could just do it that way too once you kind of get the hang of this. So my y-intercept is 9. So that'll be right here on my graph, okay? Now I've got 2 points plotted. To get my third point, I'm going to just reflect this point over the y-axis. So I can see that it's 3 units away from my axis of symmetry. So instead of 3 to the left, I'm going to now go 3 to the right. So my reflected point would be right there. And then after that, I'm able to connect them. And then there's a sketch of my graph. Okay. All right, I'll let you do number 3 on your own. And I want to skip over to number 5. And we'll do that one before we call it quits. So go ahead and do number 4 on your own, and then let's talk about number 5. So I'm going to start that one the same way. I'm going to use my axis of symmetry to find that first. So using my formula, I've got an a value of 2. I've got a b value this time of 0. I have no x's. My c value, on the other hand, is 2. Okay, so now I've got all that cleared up. Now I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. So I'm going to have, well, negative 0 is just 0, and then 2 times 2 on the bottom. So my axis of symmetry is going to be at x equals 0. So if I come down and put that on here, x equals 0, that's just the y-axis. So it's going to be reflected over this axis right here. Okay, so now that I've got that, I am going to go ahead and plug in 0 in for x so that I can find my vertex. Okay, and so my vertex will be at the point when y equals 2. So my vertex, ordered pair would be 0, 2. So that would be right here. So there's my vertex. Now, next on my list would be to find the y-intercept. However, I've kind of already found that because my vertex just so happens to be on my y-axis. It is my y-intercept. So I kind of have to skip that step. However, that kind of puts me in a bind because now I've only got one step, and if I try to reflect it over the axis of symmetry, I just end up with the same thing. So what I have to do now in order to get 2 more points that I can plot is I just need to use my XY table that we've come to know and love. So I'm just going to pick some points. I've already used x equals 0, so maybe I'll do 1 and negative 1. And then I'm going to just plug that back in for x, and so that I can find another ordered pair that I could do. So I'll do y equals 2 times 1 squared plus 2. So y would equal 4. So I can plot the point 1, 4 now. Okay, and then actually if I wanted to, I can go ahead and plug in negative 1, and I would get 4 again. Or I could just use my graph here, and if I reflect this point now over my y-axis, I'll end up with negative 1, positive 2. And then I have enough that I can connect them all up. Alright, so now that you've got that one, you should be good to go ahead and finish the rest. So you should be finishing number 3 on the previous page, number 4 on this page, and then I want you to go ahead and complete numbers 6 and 7 as well. And remember, you can check your answers with my answer key.